being female was the biggest barrier to my journey in sport, full stop. Boxing was my first love. I just couldn't pursue it originally as a kid because it wasn't legal for women to compete. So I had to wait a really long time to be able to, and the time felt right. And I think that beginning of finally being able to pursue that true love of boxing was really exciting.
Welcome back to Dive Beyond Sport, the podcast where performance meets humanity. Today's guest is Stacy Copeland. Stacy, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
Woo, great to have you here, Stacey. So just as a bit of an opener, obviously you've done so much. You've competed internationally in 2 sports. You're now involved in media. You set up a charity. But I thought just to begin with, if you could maybe just take us to a moment in any part of your career that you still maybe recall often and think back to with really fond memories.
I think probably getting started in boxing, because as you said, I'd had my football career, and that last injury that I got in football really broke my heart. I never really felt the same about the sport afterwards. I felt like it betrayed me really. And boxing was my first love. I just couldn't pursue it originally as a kid because it wasn't legal for women to compete. So I'd had to wait a really long time to be able to, and the time felt right. And I think that beginning of, finally being able to pursue that true love of boxing was really exciting. And you don't know what's yet to come, do you? So it was brilliant to finally get the chance to start out in something that I'd always wanted to do.
That's amazing. You already mentioned a couple of things there that I'm keen to kind of dive deeper into during this conversation. But to go back before any of your careers really started, was sport always the driving force of your identity? Was it always there for you? Was it almost like by any means necessary you were going to be an athlete, or were there other options for you before sport became the focus?
No, I always definitely would have done sport. I think just the sport that I did depends on probably similar things to most people, although obviously there's some outliers, but generally the environment you're in, like it was highly unlikely I was going to be a surfer because I'm in Manchester. So I think environment can play its role. And then
if it rains enough in Manchester,
exactly. But I think the things that you have access to, which can sometimes be, some sports can be inaccessible due to, travel, money, whatever it might be. So I just think I definitely would have ended up in a sport. But then I think there's other factors, and also just what you fall in love with. It's none of us really know why we fall in love with things, hobbies, passions, people, sports, but we do. And sometimes it's difficult to explain why. It is just a feeling and that magic that happens. And I'm really lucky that I fell in love with 2 sports that was sort of my identity throughout my life.
And so then just again, to tie that back to what you were saying in the, after your first answer, being involved in boxing or wanting to be, because your family, they were boxers. Am I right in thinking? Yeah. But I probably should have known this or remembered this, but until I was just researching this episode, I didn't realize that it was illegal until even not that long ago, really, for women to be in boxing. So, what was it like? So, young, first of all, I suppose I just want to ask about young Stacey, and I want to get a bit of a vibe on your energy and kind of what you were like as a youngster, because it sounded like you were just super determined and wanted to do sport at any cost. But then also to just ask what it was then like to be denied the chance to do something that you were super interested in.
I had loads and loads and loads of energy as a kid, and still have, which I see as a sort of mini superpower in a way, because I can fit loads more into my life than people who need more sleep. So sometimes it catches up with me, but generally speaking, I have loads and loads of energy. And I did as a kid, which is probably why school wasn't the greatest fit for me. But put me out in the playground, and that was it. I was in my element, and I was the only girl. But to be honest, I don't remember noticing that until it was pointed out a bit later that I was the only girl, because I was just playing football with my mates, and that was it. It wasn't until I'd gone along to the primary school team training session, when they picked the team to play, like, you know, you play other schools, whatever, at primary school. And it was in that first game, which felt great, being in like the first proper game with like real goals, and it was on grass, and we all had a matching kit. You know, it's not the playground where it's, you know, you just like have a makeshift pitch or whatever. And at the time, although women's football was no longer banned, the FA, the Football Association, didn't officially recognise girls and women's football. So yes, the ban was lifted in 1971, but it was 1993 before the football. And as you two will well know as athletes, it's great being able to do a sport, but there's very little point if there's no competitions, no teams. Like that's what really it's all about, isn't it? So because of that, there weren't any teams or structures in place for girls, really. There was very, very few, and you weren't allowed to play with the boys. So it made it really difficult to play in that case. And then in that first game, a parent and a coach on the other team recognised that I was a girl and shouted across the pitch, you know, that I wasn't allowed to play and whatever. And I had to leave, and it was a horrible feeling, obviously, which it is for human beings. Like, we want to belong. We certainly don't want to be rejected by anyone in any environment. And so for lots of people, male, female, whether, you know, whatever the reason is, aspects of your humanity that makes you be rejected, you don't want to pursue that passion anymore. For anybody who's rejected in an environment like that, for any aspect of the humanity, it makes them want to give up and not pursue it, because it's not a nice way to feel. And that's really, really sad, because imagine, you know, God, if I have to think about my life without sport, I can't, as I'm sure you two can't. It's a huge, huge part of me and my life. And so it's sad to think that some people miss out on stuff because of that. But for whatever reason, I wasn't wired that way, and I went home and I said to my mum, right, I want to play football, but I'm not allowed to play with the boys, so you're just going to have to cut my hair short so that I can pretend to be a boy. And that's what happened. I was given a boy's name, each time we played, and I pretended to be a boy, and which you can do at primary school level. The problem was with kids saying, eventually, why do you want to be a boy? And calling me like shim, she-male and stuff, and I didn't want to be a boy. I just wanted to play football, but at the time, that was the only way. So I wasn't really aware of being the only girl until then.
Super interesting, and what you just repeated there is something that I guess somewhat resonates with me, because when I was developing in diving, I was one of very few black divers. It's not common to see someone that looks like me doing the sport that I did, but like you, I never actually saw myself as the only black diver. I was just there diving with my mates, and I just enjoyed it. I just had fun and I was good at it, so I fit in well. I never felt, segregated or maybe affected by my skin color, but I also never had like a serious rejection because of it.
Yeah.
Until a later point, when I just didn't get selections for events. And that rejection, I can imagine, is something very difficult to deal with. But I guess it speaks to the person that you are as to why you're able to be like, right, doesn't matter, I'm just going to find a way to get around it. Where does that approach and mindset come from? Is it something that you grew up with?
I don't know, I've thought about this loads of times, because I can't be too sort of, philosophical about it. I was like 7 or 8 years old, so I definitely won't have sat there and been all introspective and been like, oh, this is oppression at its finest at primary school level. I must stand up.
So that's have been part of the thing, right? It's an internal, just like natural thing that just comes out, and you don't have the awareness at that age to obviously question it. But there's something within you. But I think it kind of speaks to the whole nature versus nurture. Like, do you believe that's something that is just part of your DNA, or is it something to do with the way that you were brought up by your parents, or
it might be a bit of both from
a younger age?
Yeah, it might be a bit of both, Fiona. And also, maybe it was better that it happened when I was like a younger kid, because had that happened as a teenager, that might have been a very, very different experience, because my brain would have been at a different stage of development. I would have been acutely aware of rejection, because that's the part of the brain that's, you know, as we know with teenagers, desperate to fit in. It's finding your tribe, all of that. So maybe it would have been a different experience then. Perhaps it was, you know, good for me to have that early and realise, right, this being a girl thing is going to be a problem here and one that I'm going to have to navigate, because I really love football and obviously boxing alongside it. Because it was the same in the boxing gym. I mean, I didn't ever think of myself as being the only girl in the boxing gym. I was just, all my mates, we'd just, you know, we'd go and train together, and I absolutely loved it. I loved the hard work. I loved the camaraderie of it. I loved, you know, going to the shows at weekend and all piling into a tiny minibus, and those memories were great. And it wasn't until when I was 11 and me and that group of mates went to my granddad and said, right, we're ready to box. And he said, okay, we'll get you to see the doctor, we'll get your medical done, get you boxing. And then that was when he looked at me and he said, you know, you can't box, kid. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, it's illegal for girls and women. And as an 11-year-old, illegal to me meant, you know, burglary, you know, whatever, not a kid trying to do a sport they loved. But that was completely different, because that was illegal by law. It wasn't just a governing body banning, you know, females' access to football pitches or whatever. It was a totally different kettle of fish. So then I was like, oh my God, this is a problem everywhere. Like, what's going on, you know? So I think maybe it was good that I was a bit younger and you don't question things as much when you're little and you just love something. But having said that, there are kids that do. And that's why it's really important, you know, your voice, to share your experience, and Freddie yours and me mine, so that hopefully others will know they're not on their own if they're made to feel like that, and that it is worth pushing through, and that you've got people who've got your back in a way, who are behind you because they understand what that's like. So, you know, hopefully they can push through it and not miss out on the best experiences of their life because other people are too narrow-minded.
You're probably one of very few people who have a very direct, clear understanding of the rules at that time when boxing was illegal for females to do, full stop. Can you explain a little bit more about that? I mean, I can't comprehend how that works, because like in my generation things have been kind of free and open, but it's also like, again, past generations when there was actually segregation, those kind of things, race related, but also there's gender related things. Can you explain a little bit more about how that actually looked and how it would be enforced and different things like that?
Absolutely. So in football, that came in 1921 when, so obviously there'd been the period of a lot of men going out to war, and in the munitions factories, all the women were working in the factories whilst the men were away. And football obviously had been massive part of our, you know, tradition, culture, whatever way of life in this country back then. And the women started to form football teams representing their factories, and they used to play each other. So one of the really famous ones was Dick Kerr's ladies from that factory, and they started getting massive followings. And famously at Goodison Park, the old Everton ground, there was, you know, tens of thousands of people on Boxing Day went to watch, and it was getting bigger and bigger. And this was problematic to the people who were in, you know, had all the power in the sport. And gradually, as men started to come back from war, they didn't want women playing football. They wanted us taking care of everything, breeding, you know, and looking after kids, being in the kitchen, whatever. So that was a whole wave of everything for women, full stop, who'd had careers, had a bit of freedom. It wasn't just football, obviously, that was across the board. But football was certainly a collateral damage in that. And they put out a statement saying it wasn't ladylike for women to play football. I mean, who really aspires to be ladylike anyway? That's certainly not. What even is that? Like, nobody's ever said as a kid, what's your dream? To be ladylike. All right. So I don't even know what that's all about.
Making munitions is ladylike.
Yeah, exactly. I know when
it's convenient.
Exactly. Yeah. So typical of systemic, I won't use the word, but anyway, BS. But yeah, so that then what they did was banned women from using any football pitches. So women did play. So there's a really famous team, there's a film just come out about them called the Manchester Corinthians, who did play during that time, but they played in parks and any area that they could find. They just weren't allowed on proper pitches. And as I say, therefore there weren't any, teams, leagues and stuff. But the Corinthians in sort of the, 40s, 50s, 60s went playing abroad and everything, and went and played in like South America. They went to France, they're all over, and the stories were never ever told. And the Women's World Cup in Mexico never ever told that story until the film came out about it about 4 years ago. So for me growing up, that meant I thought, yes, you are a weirdo because no other women want to play football. What's the matter with you? Yes, there were all these women that wanted to play football and do all sorts of sports, but they were banned. And understanding the history of women's sport really helped me understand my history as a woman in sport, and understand that I wasn't weird. There'd been lots of women who'd come before me, but they just weren't allowed to. So I found that was really helpful. And then the ban was lifted in 1971. But as I say, the FA didn't recognise it till 93. So we actually really should only talk about women's football and the evolution of it since 93, not 1971. Boxing was totally different. That was illegal. And boxing had a few things to change because they had what was called, in terms of not gender but race, the black bar, which was in for a long time, which is another thing people don't know anything about. And that's because when you look at boxing, there are loads and loads of black stars. In fact, obviously, black boxers have been the most famous, really, ever. When you look at Muhammad Ali and Sugar Ray, and the list goes on and on and on. So people don't think there will have ever been anything like that. It was, they've always been able, been included, whatever. But it wasn't. In this country, there was a black bar, which when it was in place, meant that even if a black boxer, like Len Johnson, a really famous black boxer from Manchester, won a title, they couldn't have the title. I mean, it's ridiculous, but they didn't. So now there's been a few, like at the ex-Boxers Hall of Fame that they have every year, posthumously they have awarded to the families of those boxers, because they're not with us anymore, the actual, those titles that they won and should have had. So there was a lot that needed to change in boxing. For women, it was banned, and that was challenged by Jane Couch in 97, 98. It was an ongoing court case, and it was two women who, one of them had read in a newspaper about Jane Couch not being able to box in this country because of the ban. And she was a barrister or whatever, and thought that's an illegality, if that makes sense. The rule's illegal based on not sex, but not being on sexist, but on the right to work. So it was actually challenged, not on the fact that you ought not to ban women from, competition, but because it's she should have a right to work. Isn't that crazy? So that's what they challenged. But they did get down to the ins and outs of gender in the court case, and it just looked ridiculous for the board, because they said at one point, one of the things that they used to say was that because we have periods, like at least once a month, we won't have enough sanity and control over ourselves to fight, which is really interesting, because I think when you look at, wars, murders, whatever, we're not really the ones that are responsible for that on a grand scale. In terms of gender, it tends to be more men, funnily enough. But anyway, we were the ones that weren't in control. And it was really interesting because the barrister, it was Dina Rose and Sarah Leslie, the two barristers that fought it. And one of them said, so you wouldn't be happy with a woman operating machinery at that time of the month? No, definitely not. What about operating vehicles? No, definitely not. And then she really trapped him, because she said, would you be all right with a woman then at that time of the month having complete responsibility for a brand new born baby? And it was like, oh dear. So it's really smart the way they made the argument, because of course that's what women are expected to do. And so it started to unravel, but it was all on the basis of the right to work and earn money. And gender shouldn't be your sex shouldn't be a barrier to that. So yeah, interesting how it all came about.
Well, I mean, thank you for so well articulating and explaining that, because, you know, this, I mean, embarrassingly, I guess, but I'm sure I speak for a lot of people, and for Fiona as well. Like, I didn't know a lot of these things.
I
and it's-
didn't.
Well,
I didn't
actually,
know.
I
Yeah.
didn't know any of that.
and you're right. It's actually what you say about, it made me realize when you said that earlier about like it made you feel better to understand your history, because you felt like, actually, I'm not weird, you know, whatever that is. And and I actually thought immediately, you know, to segregation and things like that. I know, like, you know, the real history around around black people and so on, and not being, and again, it's like there's so many stories that just haven't been told. It would have helped so many people, and it's just really, it was really interesting hearing that from you, Stacey. And I remember when I was again looking into this, I think I heard you talk about a story of, I think, Catherine Switzer, is that right? Is that her name?
Yeah.
The Boston Marathon, and again, I didn't realize this really. Women weren't allowed to run the Boston Marathon, or it was seen as, you correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's any marathon. Women at one point were, and this is the importance of people who are pioneers and who do it the first time. So, like, these myths that were almost said as factual science for years, that like black people, they can't swim because they've got different bones and whatever, and they can't do gymnastics because they're just but then Simone Biles came along and everyone was like, oh well, we mean other people, black people, not Simone Biles. But eventually there will be, maybe not loads of Simone Biles because she's pretty, do you know what I mean, pretty exceptional, but there will be lots more black gymnasts, swimmers in every, and then suddenly, then it can change, but it has to be challenged. And that's like with Pave the Way, the charity that's set up. The whole premise for us is question it, challenge it, change it. Because it will be questioned, like Yona, when you started, is that a black kid diving? Yeah, and then he dives, and then you go, oh. And it's just that tiny seed that starts, and people will say, oh, black people can't dive. And everyone who's seen Yona will go, there is this one guy who was really good, and it starts that conversation then. And you know, sport can have an enormous impact on the rest of society in that way, which is one of its most, you know, powerful uses, really, to challenge things and stereotypes. So I think, you know, it takes people to do it for then other people to see and break down those stereotypes. And the reason why Catherine Switzer was so important is that at one point women weren't allowed to run more than 200 metres and were banned from the marathon. And they gave several reasons for this. One was that we would get big legs, horrendous, a hairy chest, which is like just so silly. And then the third reason, the big one, is that they said if women ran marathons, then the uterus could fall out, which is hilarious, isn't it? That, like, and this is the point of question it, challenge it, change it. How did nobody say, well, babies come out of there and all the other stuff doesn't fall out, like it seems to all stay in, so maybe they can jog, we're probably all right jogging. But until it's questioned and say, do you really think all that, you know, a uterus is going to fall out if we jog? No, let's try it then. Then it gets challenged, and when it's challenged, it can be changed. So Catherine Switzer did run the Boston Marathon, and they realised she was a woman because she entered as Kay Switzer. And when they realised the K stood for Catherine, she was a woman, they tried to drag her off the course. And it was her boyfriend of the time and a few other men actually who stood in and said, no, she's finishing it. And she did finish it. And then it was opened up to women after that. And there was 8 women that ran it the first year. And we look now at all the marathons and ultra marathons across the world that women run, and they do exceptionally well in them. That's only been possible because that silly thing was challenged. Unless it's true. And I always say that if it's true, then my uterus is on a football pitch or a boxing ring somewhere, and I didn't know what it was for anyway, but it's long gone, so never mind. But yeah, so how ridiculous that kept all women back for that long because they thought these ridiculous things, but that's how powerful myths and stereotypes can be.
Isn't it the thing that the more extreme the distance gets in an ultramarathon or something like that, the better women are actually able to do due to just body composition and everything, which is really interesting in that fact.
Yeah,
but it is hilarious, some of the reasonings behind why certain people couldn't do certain things. But whoever created these reasons clearly did a very good job of making it compelling because everyone believed it, first of all, which is why it stayed like that for so long.
And how long they last, Fiona, as well.
Yeah,
Because
it's crazy.
now people do understand that somebody's uterus isn't going to fall out because, one, we understand the science behind it, but we've also seen thousands and thousands of women compete at all levels in sport. However, the essence of it, or whatever the right word is, that doesn't really go away.
Yeah, like the principle of it.
Yeah, the idea that what's behind that is that we're weak, incapable, our bodies, all of these things do stay there, just like we've seen with things that, with race that we see, right, that wasn't right, but it goes on and on and on through generations. It's a different battle and it manifests in a different way, but there's still a battle. It lasts a long, long time, doesn't it?
And exactly that. And because, again, it's so compelling at the time, only you can understand how crazy it is in hindsight. But actually, me in the position I am now, thanks to the sport that I did and the career that I've had, understanding that history, like you said, understanding the history of women's sport for you, it gives me so much gratitude because I'm like, wow, like just the fact that I've had the opportunity to be able to do all of this in the first place, maybe even 15, 20, 30 years before I started diving, I wouldn't have had that chance because of so many factors that were so far out of my control. And that's why I think history is really important. And again, that's why your answer was so brilliant, because to understand where we are now and the capabilities that we all have, I think there's still a way to go, but the equality compared with not that long ago gives everyone so much more opportunity, which is really exciting. And that sounds like what your charity is obviously trying to achieve as well. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of what that's all about and how that is helping people, why it's so important?
Yeah, of course. And that's for two reasons. One, because, and why conversations like this are so important, and role models like yourself, and because yes, there's a different version of it that you're fighting against through each generation, but also is to, for us all to remember that there's lots of people in lots of countries who it's still not equal, well, far from equal. So I think it's really important to, raise awareness on that and make sure, and at its most serious level, it's about undervaluing human beings and dehumanizing people, isn't it? And that is such an incredibly damaging and dangerous and sometimes life-threatening thing to do. Because if you don't see someone as a human, then you don't have police officers treating a black prisoner the same, or black person under arrest the same. And for when you look at the numbers for women, 2 a week still being murdered by a current or former partner. We've got a massive issue with just valuing women, and we always seem to have this conversation of, imagine if it was your sister or your mother. Well, you shouldn't really have to imagine that, like your women are the ones that matter. Women matter, human beings matter, black, white, female, whatever, matter. And I think when we dehumanize people, then what seems like it shouldn't matter, and it's only language, and it's just a bit of fun, and it's just banter, and they're only, all of that stuff. If we allow that, we know the level after the level after the level that it goes to. So that's why it's important to challenge it, I think. And Pave the Way began just as, when I started boxing and I was coming up to have my pro debut, you usually have a nickname, don't you, like the Assassin or whatever. And my nickname's SpongeBob SquarePants, because whenever I get injured, and like when I used to get injured, or just constantly now, I used to put weight on, and so I go square shaped, like I am pretty much a square shaped person. So because all my mates are horrible, they used to call me SpongeBob. And I was like, it's not a great name for a boxer, is it? So I did have it on my shorts and stuff. I stayed true to myself, but it wasn't really great for boxing. So I decided to go with something that I wanted to stand for and something that meant a lot to me, which was Pave the Way. So originally it was just about paving the way for girls and women in sport, in boxing, and particularly those who didn't have that Olympic platform, because when they said that the women's boxing was going to be at the Olympics in 2012, any of us that were involved in boxing, and particularly if you're on like the England team or on the periphery, that was like unbelievable news. We were like, oh my God, this is actually going to happen. Then when they announced there was only going to be 3 weight categories, then it was like, oh my God, because we compete in like 10, 13 weight categories at different events. My weight was right in between 2. And so unless I was going to grow a couple of feet or chop a leg off or something, there was no chance. And it was absolutely devastating to realise that you're not even going to get a chance to chase that ultimate dream because of your gender, like it would be for any reason. But in this case, you know, just what you were born. And it was horrible, gut-wrenching. So I couldn't take that Olympic platform into, you know, the pro game. So I just wanted to be an example that you can, you know, you can make it going through the small hall route. So part of it was wanting to show that if you didn't have that Olympic foundation and platform, or Commonwealth Games even, which really helps your career when you go pro, then you can still, you know, make it on the small hall shows. So it's a bit multifaceted. But then through public speaking, when I was meeting loads of women who would come up to me after and say, oh, my experience in tech or in law or in business has been just very similar to yours, I thought this needs to branch out beyond sport. And then there was a lot of parents and people coming to me saying, you know, it was one conversation in particular which made me think this needs to be for boys, girls, men and women, because it does affect boys and men in different ways, and sometimes ways that aren't as blatant maybe. But the one conversation that I was already starting to think, right, we need to open this out to beyond sport. And then a dad came to me after I'd done an awards evening at a school and said, oh, my son really enjoyed your talk. He was about 10 or 11. You know, it really resonated. So I said, oh, is he a boxer? Assuming that was the bit that resonated. He said, no, he's a ballet dancer. So I said, oh, right, okay. And I said, and then it started to click a bit that it was like the other side of it maybe not fitting in. So I said, oh, right, well, tell me about him. And he said, well, he stopped dancing. And I'm hoping, you know, this might have helped. I said, why has he stopped dancing? And he told me this story that he'd got, you know how they can do gradings or whatever in dance, and he is obviously like really, really talented, and he'd just flown through the gradings like much younger than, you know, usual kids. And the dad, had gone to, he had the picture of it and whatever of his son, you know, in his whatever he wears to dance in and his certificate, and he'd shown it to a couple of pals, and one of them had said, oh, flipping it, mate, are you raising a PUFF or something? And he said, like, I was just sort of struck, and his son was there. And I mean, for a start, it's just a bit weird to think of a 10-year-old in that way anyway, like, you know, they're just a kid. But anyway, and it stopped after that. And that's what I mean about these things stop people pursuing. So anyway, I had a chat with him, and I wrote to him after that. And anyway, he picked up, you know, got back into dancing again. But that's when I thought, right, this needs to be for boys and men too, because it affects them. Whether it's fewer or in a different way, whatever, it still matters. So that's why it's now about challenging, you know, the gender stereotypes that don't allow us to reach our full potential for boys, girls, men and women. And whether that's potential in our career, whether that's potential in a passion that we might not be great at, but we love it and we pursue it, or your potential as a father. Because this list that we attribute to men and women, you know, women get the list of feminine attributes that we're supposed to have, and men get the list of masculine. And that's all right, but we shouldn't be all of them all the time. Like, I shouldn't be nurturing and sensitive or whatever the feminine ones are when I'm going to get in a boxing ring. You know, like, of course not. I'm going to have a different list of attributes then. But when I'm with my nieces and they're upset or I'm playing with them, but it's exactly the same for a man. You know, men should be nurturing and kind and all of that when they're with their kids or other people's kids in certain environments. But you know, in another environment, they might need to be stoic and this and that. So it's about allowing people to be all aspects of a human being.
Well, and it's so, like, to me, it's just all around identity, and it kind of shows just how powerful identity is. And even for people, you know, those sorts of stories, and even in our own ways, you know, even in my experience, like, I always had quite a lot of imposter syndrome and feeling like I wasn't ever good enough to be competing with some of the guys I was competing against. And just these stories that I told myself, and then any excuse to kind of validate them. So I used to believe that I wasn't quite as strong as some others. And it's like, one day in the gym, I see like a diver who's a few years younger than me. And on that day, he's happened to like back squat more than I have, and he's younger than me. And it just like collapses my world. It's like, I knew I was weak, and there's the proof, you know. And I could like send myself into a spiral about it. And I think that's so incredible about what you're talking about, Stacey, and with this Pave the Way, and how important that is, because then you're giving people the chance to potentially, you know, rewrite those beliefs. And even talking about it from my side, I really just realized, talking to you again, like what Yona said, how much privilege, in a sense, I've got. And it was kind of scary listening to some of your earlier stories and thinking like, that's not that long ago. And I take it so much for granted. Like, my stepsister just entered into a marathon. She's going to do her first marathon in Sweden. I'm like, you know, super excited for her. Like, oh, that's cool. And she gets to run around some lakes in Sweden in the summer. Like, oh, how great is that? And it's like, and that's so normal to me. Like, well, of course she can enter the marathon if she wants to. Why would she not be able to? Yeah. But it's like, but people couldn't, and it really scared me. And it must be amazing. I mean, it must be so rewarding for you to see, you know, some like positive changes that you're doing with Pave the Way, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're just about to launch our primary school project, and what we've decided to do for that is use real people, and a mix of people. So some that are really exceptional, and some that are just doing something they like or enjoy or whatever. And we've had these, we're putting a lesson plan together, and we've had these postcards made where it's, you know, somebody who does a certain job or a hobby or whatever, and then it's got a bit of information about them. And we're going to do a lesson plan around it, but without saying, oh, look, this is a male gymnast, this is a female firefighter, this is a male nurse, this is a female whatever. We've just put the picture of the person and information about them. And so it's kind of just normalized, rather than being dead blatant about it and saying, you know, women can be firefighters and men can be this, that, and the other. But we will have that conversation at the end of the lesson with the kids, to just, again, it's that, you know, as long as they've got that one example, then kids really like educating everybody else, don't they? You know what kids are like when they've learned something, they come home and they want to tell everyone what they've learned. And they also can police each other in quite a positive way sometimes not, but they can be good. If a kid says, girls can't this or such body can't that, they go, no, boys can dance. We learn about, and then they'll have this real example of a real person. So that's an example of some of the stuff we do. Last year we did a big art project at a youth club, which works with boys and girls together to do a big mural. We used a real artist, like an amazing friend of mine who's a brilliant artist, because I didn't want to pretend I know how to do a mural. So she actually made it look good. But and they did a mural all about, you know, stereotypes and identity, and sometimes there's intersectionality that comes into that. You know, because the experience for sort of an Asian boy trying to do that might be different to a white boy trying to do that. Same with girls or someone with a disability or whatever. So, you know, that allowed them to use their voice that's from their actual experience. Same with class. That rarely gets talked about. In some sports, it's a real, you know, it's there. And it's a barrier to some people, or it makes them feel like they don't fit in. So like it is in other areas of life. So there's all different ways of approaching it, I suppose.
The more you talk about what you've got going on, and the more I think about the name Pave the Way, obviously it makes more and more sense. And it's such a fantastic name, because that's what it's all about. It's like creating that path of opportunity and just showing that it's possible. And once one person sees that, is possible in someone else, then they can continue and follow, and someone else can then, you know, follow on behind, and
Yeah.
it's just creating a path, and it shows why being a pioneer is so scary, because imagine heading on a path that has not been paved for you already. It's tough.
Yeah.
It's scary. You don't know what, you know, ditches are going to be there and what problems you're going to face. But I think it means also that there's less chance of kind of wasting potential, leaving things on the table,
Yeah.
due to failures, you could call it, that are out of your control. Obviously, you've been extremely determined in your career. You've overcome a lot. You mentioned very early on about your injury, your last injury in football. How much do you think was left on the table in terms of your career and what you could potentially achieve due to the failures of maybe society or sport or other things, you know, that might have led to injuries potentially that could have been avoided maybe?
Huge. I think my sort of being female, without a doubt, was the biggest barrier to my journey in sport, full stop. Because obviously you experience, male or female, you know, able-bodied para athlete, anybody, you know, you're an athlete. At the end of the day, you're gonna have injuries, aren't you? You're gonna have setbacks. You're gonna lose. You know, all of those things are gonna happen. That is part of sport. But sport at its best, I think, illuminates and highlights and elevates the best of us as human beings. And so when it doesn't, it's more disappointing for me, because it's brilliant when it does that, and it's so good at doing that. So yeah, I think when the barriers come because of, you know, part of your humanity that you can't do anything about, it's deeply disappointing, because at its best it does the opposite. And it's a real leveler, isn't it? You know, it's a meritocracy sport. You know, nobody gets picked for a team because their mum or dad played on that team. You know, they might get a foot in the door, but if they're not good enough, they're not staying on the team. That's it. That's how sport works. So it's you can come from any background and make it if you're good enough and you get that bit of luck and you've got the talent and all of that. So that's a precious thing about sport. And yeah, so I think when it makes people feel lesser than because of the things that are in place, that's terrible. And with me, I don't know what the experience is like. Obviously, it'd be interesting from your point of view, Yona, on this is, you know, when people questioned your right to be there because of purely skin colour, how that feels. Because for me, what I found a lot, because of the sports that I did, because they were so male dominated, people would constantly question my femininity as if I'm not a real woman. And that is, it makes you feel a certain way about yourself. You know, does make you feel like there's something wrong. And so I think the ways that people speak about people who are doing something different, or they've been the only, you know what I mean? They've been the only one or the first one, or they don't know many of them. They can speak about you in a positive way, obviously sometimes, but sometimes it's the language they use, do you know, that for me made me feel like I'm not a real woman or something. And it's not a nice way to feel, do you know, because you're like, to me, it's just a sport I do. You know, I don't walk around in a gum shield and a headguard all the time punching people, like when I'm going about my daily business. Like, that'd be weird. So they don't separate it, though, and they think it's as if there's something wrong with you. So I think that can be really damaging, the way that that's spoken about. And if they're speaking about big stars like that, you know, people like you who've been to the Olympics and stuff and have got a massive platform, what does that say to youngsters? That's why we need to speak out and go, no, what you're doing is this, and we unpick it like that, and you're okay. Or words to that effect. It's dead important.
Do you think I've had similar experiences in that way? And it's not really something that I've spoken about much, but obviously I was in a kind of white dominated sport in diving. I also went to a private school where I was one of 3 black people in my year, which, you know, made me behave a certain way. But I learned to change my personality almost, the way that I spoke, the way that I behaved, depending on who I was around. When I was around some of my friends from home, I'd behave in a certain way. When I was around my friends from school, I'd behave in a certain way. And when I was around my friends from diving, I'd change. And there was one time where I had a birthday party, my 22nd, and I had groups of friends from all of them. And it was so exhausting because I was going around the room just like changing my personality from like minute to minute. It was hard work. And it made me realize, first of all, I can't do that anymore. Second of all, it made me realize like how much I've had to adjust to fit in without me realizing how much I actually had to adjust. But I also think it's a strength because it's given me the flexibility to be able to be in the room with anyone and find comfort and be able to speak to absolutely anyone. Like there's very few people that I'll be in a room with that I don't feel like I can at least have a conversation with.
Yeah.
So I think it's powerful in that respect, but it's a hard thing to learn, I think, as a kid. It's really tough.
I mean,
I think all these things, like you were saying, Freddie, about experiencing that imposter syndrome and that stuff, whatever it is that each of us experience, it's a good thing in the long run, I think, because it does, if you can investigate it a little bit and figure out what's going on, it can give you more empathy to other people because you've been through something yourself, and it doesn't have to be the exact same thing because it's not going to be, but you can think, this happened to me and that's happening to them, and therefore, you know, I think that's a good thing to it as well, that you can have more empathy with people.
Well, 100%. And I also think that to some degree, it's also I've started to think more recently that it's kind of just the nature of existence, that you're going to be tweaking your personality in different moments. And that actually, that is a good thing, you know, and it's not, you know, when people say, oh, they're acting or they're not being authentic or that's, I mean, that can be true, but I also think, well, but we're always acting. Always, you know, like right now I've got like Freddie the podcaster hat on, kind of, you know, and I'm not going to talk to everyone like I'm speaking to you guys right now, you know, and so it's also, it's like you're saying, Yona, it's like just having those different like gears or like layers that you can kind of go into, and that is a skill.
And also you should, like Muhammad Ali said, you know, a man who thinks the same thing 15 years on is wasted 15 years. And of course it is. And that's the great thing about sport. It's incredibly difficult in most sports. Now, there are some that are either really male dominated, white dominated, whatever. But generally speaking, you'll come across people from all walks of life. And then it becomes impossible for you to say they are this or they are that, because you've got mates that are from those communities, cultures, religions, races, whatever. And so then you're like, it's not really like that, you know. Everyone's just people are people, and so I think sport's great in that way, that you know it introduces you to all sorts of people from all walks of life. I think that's a real beauty of it as well.
No, that is actually so true, and I would argue, sorry to some of my school friends watching this, but I would argue if they do, they probably don't. They're like, oh, whatever, Fred's podcast, so
they'll be tuning in for me, mate, not you.
Yeah, it's true. They're Yona's fan. It's so true. They're not my fan.
Well, like kids doing have that weird party where he kept changing personalities. Let's see how he's doing. Oh, he's got a pod. Let's watch it.
But I actually do credit sport with, for example, when I was younger, I was the one who was able to engage with my friends' parents as like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. I could do that. I could have that conversation. Maybe there's some credit to my parents there as well. Like my dad is certainly that character. He'll chat to anyone. But I also put that down to going to competitions around the country, meeting people like Yona, meeting loads of other people, travel, and then even traveling the world, like meeting people from Colombia, you know, China, like, and it just changes. It changes who you are, and like I have sport to thank for that. I suppose as well, Stacey. What obviously, you know, being a pioneer, paving the way for other people, that's difficult. That has responsibility. But what's been the benefit to that for you, also?
Loads of benefits. I think the biggest one for me will always be if you've been able to, you know, inspire or encourage other people. That's always, you the main thing for me, because I think it's great if you can do it for yourself, of course it is, but if that has a positive impact on others, then that, to me personally, it doesn't have to be for everyone, but for me, that is a real something that I think is precious and valuable in that sense. So, and actually, that was one of the big things that I thought about. One of the most difficult things I faced as a grown-up, as an adult in sport, after those experiences as a kid. Because that, on the football pitch, I was like 7, 8 years old, so a little kid. And then when I was 36, and I won the Commonwealth title, that was in Zimbabwe, which was just an amazing trip. I was the first British person, male or female, to fight in Zimbabwe for 36 years. It had been the Scotsman Ken Buchanan before that, and just the welcome we got. It was on Kwese Sports, which right across the continent was free to air sports channel at the time. So it was just a massive build up, and I'd never been part of anything like that. It was amazing, and the fight itself was really tough. She was a South African, and she could hit so hard. She was an absolute unit. Just the whole experience was amazing. And afterwards, there wasn't a belt, and they gave us a trophy because they, needed to give us something as like the UK team that had gone over there or whatever. But I didn't get the Commonwealth belt. Anyway, I had a picture of the belt, a laminated picture of the belt that I'd taken everywhere with me in the build-up to the fight. So we had it in the altitude chamber when we were doing rounds in there, and the climate chamber, I had it in my car, just to keep me focused on all the time, as you'll well know, visualization and all that. So me and my coach had a picture with the picture of the belt after, but obviously it wasn't, the whole point is to hold that medal, isn't it? Or that trophy, or that belt, or whatever you get in your sport. That's what you dream about. And so when I got back to the UK I got back Sunday night, and on the Monday, I rang the head of the Commonwealth Boxing Council, and I said what a phenomenal experience it had been, but it wasn't quite the fairy tale I had in mind, not getting the belt. And he said he could explain what had happened. So then he said to me that they do real belts for men and replica belts for women, and that the manufacturers of the replica belt had stopped making them. And I was like, oh my God, like, how on earth is that a thing? And at the time, I was obviously still boxing. The next step was going to be the world title, and that was going to be happening. And I knew it was a risk to speak out about these things, because they can make things really difficult if they want to. But I thought, you know what? I cannot believe that 30 years later, I am still putting up with this kind of, thing. And so I said to him, that's how ridiculous that there's a replica belt. What you're talking about? I said, I need one. I'm doing interviews. I'm going on local television this week and stuff. I need the belt to, how quickly can I have one? And he said, well, you can have one. We've got plenty here at headquarters. You can have one within a couple of weeks, but they're quite expensive. So unless you've got a sugar daddy, you probably won't be able to have one. Which, to put into words the burning sense of injustice and rage when someone speaks to you like that, when you couldn't have done any more to prove yourself. That's where it becomes not about proving yourself. That's about human dignity and, just not treating people properly because of an aspect of the humanity. And yeah, it was horrible not getting the belt in the ring, but the worst bit was getting to Manchester Airport when loads of mine and my coaches, friends and family had come to surprise us, not having the belt, and they'd told every bugger in the airport that was coming back with this belt, not having the belt to share with them, the people who go up those massive, as you two will know, massive ups and downs of sport, who were there with you every step of the way. Not having it to share with them was gut-wrenching, and it wasn't because I hadn't been dedicated. We hadn't put on a great fight. We'd done all that. It's just about human dignity. And again, that's where sport should elevate everybody, not do the opposite. And I just knew I couldn't leave it at that. And I said, right, this can't happen to a future female champion. So something's got to change. So they agreed to make a women's Commonwealth title belt. We got it in the December. I boxed in the July, and then that was it. And now it's been in place. And a couple of years ago, I was commentating in Nottingham, and I got to commentate on a young fighter called Emma Dolan, who got that belt. And so when you talk about positives, my God, I wish I wouldn't have gone through that. But after I was in a rage, like after I put the phone down to him, I was like, why is this slapping? I can't believe this is still going on. It's been decades. I was livid, I was sad, I was upset, I was, everything. But then I thought, actually, I'm exactly the right person at the right time for this to happen to, because I'm just not going to let this lie. I'm going to change it, and it's going to be better for the ones that come after. So that was my positive, because when things happen, really big things, small things, in sport, out of sport, I need to understand the point to it, find the purpose in it, and then I can find the positive. And that was it. The purpose was, I'm going to do something about it, and there was the positive. And then all those years later, well, not loads of years later, but whatever it was, 4 or 5 years later, I got to sit there ringside and commentate on a fighter having her moment, because, you know, I was compelled to do something when I didn't have mine. There can't be a bigger positive than that for me, than some things being better for someone else. So that would be the positive.
That's amazing, because it ties all the way back to one of the earlier questions at the start about your character and about why you believe that you could be that person regardless of what other people are saying, and you are actually just the right person at the right time for something like that to happen to you, to turn it from what could potentially be really, you know, severe negative for your career to a positive, not just for yourself but for other people. Which kind of leads me on to, you know, my question as we come towards the end of this is, what do you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your career? And if you knew that then, do you think it would have made any difference to the progression of your career? Or was it actually so far out of your control that even knowing something wouldn't have made a difference?
I think if there's anything, I probably would sort of say to my younger self, if you like, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not a weirdo. In fact, if anything, at this point in time, you're an extraordinary girl. You know what I mean? You're the opposite to ordinary. So far from weird. And I would want her to know, yes, how tough it's going to be. You know, when I was getting called shim and shemale and all that, I was on the school bus when I was a teenager and someone spat on me saying, you're a freak, you're a this, you're a that, just because of the sports that I was doing. I wasn't able to not internalise that at the time. I couldn't see that as, that's a shame that you think like that. I internalised it because I was a kid, and you've got a limited toolkit to deal with life, haven't you? So I would want to tell myself there's nothing wrong with you. And secondly, most important of all, I would want my little self to know that I have, or do go on to be, a woman who's proud of who she is and of what she's done. And perhaps those things would have made a difference. But even if they wouldn't have made a difference then, they do make a difference now. Me looking back and knowing there wasn't anything wrong with myself, knowing there isn't anything wrong now, and that I can feel proud. And I tell you something that really hit me last year at the Women's Euros. I'd put a thing on because I've been covering it for radio. And again, I was an absolute emotional wreck when they won, like I was when they won the previous time when we hosted it in England. Because just seeing all those families and kids and people of all ages like cheering out of their minds over women's football, I was like a total emotional wreck. Like it really hit me. But last year I put something on, you know, what a great experience. It was great covering it for radio, and somebody who I went to school with on Facebook, who I'm not in touch with, you know, I'm not in contact with or anything, just wrote on, that was amazing. We all watched it as a family, and I've just realised that what you were doing when we were at school wasn't weird. It was amazing, and that you were part of that. And that probably healed, like without her even knowing, an enormous chunk of my sense of self as a youngster. So even if it wouldn't have made a difference then, it definitely makes a difference now.
Isn't it crazy how some person from your earlier days, and that, like, the impact that can have is, gosh, wow.
I didn't even know she thought I was weird, to be honest, Ren. Like, cheers, Christ. Another one. I knew the others. I didn't think you thought I was weird as well. Bloody hell, but at least she said something good straight after, so okay, cool.
Oh, goodness. Oh, man. Oh, aren't we all funny? Stacey, obviously we have to name this episode, and so we like to ask, to sort of facilitate that, we like to ask what your if your life were a film, were a movie, what would the title be?
Can't use SpongeBob, can I? Copyright.
Well, I was kind of wondering whether you were going to use it or not, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I think it'd have to be Paving the Way. It would
Paving
have
the
to
way.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love that.
and that's now what I'm trying to do in broadcasting. So it's continued in retirement.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, that is something we didn't get onto at all. You know, your post-sport, well, obviously the charity side of things, but your media career, the broadcast career and all that stuff. I mean, I would have loved to have asked a lot more about that. Of course, we are going to go into a small little bonus section first, so maybe we can touch a little bit on those things. But I just want to say, kind of at the end of this main section, a massive thank you. I think, as I say, we didn't get onto some of those things, but I just think the kind of primary message of this episode is really, really powerful. And I think it's been a bit of a hearing some of the stories that you've told that I was unaware of is a bit of a wake-up call as to how to not take some of these things for granted, number one, and how important it is to be a pioneer, to pave the way, to support other people, to change some of these, trying to help people change these messages in their head where they think they don't belong, because it can affect people in so many ways. So I really want to just thank you for your stories, for what you're doing, for joining us today. It was a real pleasure. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And that's why it's so important what you two are doing through this podcast, but also through many other things that you do is changing stigmas, changing stereotypes, being role models. Those conversations, they make a difference to people, and you'll always get the people who make fun or put you down or whatever, but we can't stop doing good things because there's some people who are hell-bent on, being a negative. We can't allow that. We've got to, be the best that we can be and do the best for others. So, and you two are an example of that. So thank you as well.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. All right, well, that is where we will wrap up this main episode. So thanks again to Stacy Copeland. Stacy will be hanging around for one more dive, our bonus section. So if you're not there yet, the link will be in the show notes. And otherwise, we will catch you in the next one. Thank you very much.